Hey, everybody. Welcome to the LinkedIn Live event hosted by the Inclusion Initiative. I'm Grace Young Foster. I'm the founder and CEO. Really excited to have you all here with us today. Really excited about my guest today and this important conversation we're about to have on transracial adoption and the Hispanic and Latinx community and how the adoption community is such a big part of the whole Hispanic and Latinx community, and just some of the missing pieces of the conversation there. So we do want to have you participate in our discussion. So please do use the reactions on the LinkedIn bottom screen. Feel free to comment. Feel free to ask questions with the comment function. We'd love to hear from you, and we'd love to hear what's resonating with you as Ben and I chat today. So please also keep in mind that we're honoring lived experience and we're honoring stories as from us as people who are transracial adoptees and foster care alumni. So be respectful in your comments, be respectful in your questions, and we really appreciate you being allies, supporters, friends of our community. So without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce you to Benjamin Fossen. He is the principal engineer at HR Acuity, and he's also the co-founder and board chair at Adoptees with Guatemalan Roots. He is a transracial adoptee and is joining us today from Benjamin. Where are you joining us from today?
From Houston, Texas.
Houston, Texas. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. Really excited about the community that you and your co-founders have built and just the resources and the advocacy work and the adoptee-centered work that you're doing at Guatemalans or Adoptees with Guatemalan Roots. So hear a little bit about you, a little bit about your story, your background. So please share with us what you'd like our audience to know about you.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to start by saying, thanks for having me on as a guest today, Grace. I'm really looking forward to the conversation we're going to have today. And, I think it's just really cool what you're all doing with the Inclusion Initiative. So really excited to see what comes out of that and join that
Thank you.
community.
Thank you. Well, you're a part of it now.
Yeah. But yeah, as you mentioned, I'm a principal data engineer at HR Acuity. We're a tech company in the employee relations space. And then I'm also the co-founder of Adoptees with Guatemalan Roots, and we're a 501c3 nonprofit, and we're just a global community of people adopted from Guatemala. And we operate here in the United States, but we also work with the Guatemalan adoptees that live in Europe, as well as several other parts of the world. And yeah, just a little bit about myself. I am 33. I was adopted from Guatemala when I was 4 months old, and I grew up in Minnesota in the suburbs of Minneapolis, the Twin Cities, so pretty close to Minneapolis. And yeah, I think the first time I went back to Guatemala was when I was 17 years old, and then kind of just fell in love with the country. I've been back. I've kind of lost track of how many times, probably around 40 or more times. But yeah, I go back frequently. Yeah, it's a beautiful country. But yeah, so a little bit about my kind of personal connection and journey with adoption from Guatemala. I didn't know anyone else adopted from Guatemala until I was, in my mid to late 20s. So I always kind of thought that I didn't know that this was a, global phenomena, that there was about estimated 50,000 other children that were adopted. So I kind of thought that I was just on my own. I mean, I was aware that there was a few others I'd run into people who would mention, oh, we have a friend who adopted from Guatemala. Uh, but yeah, it wasn't until I think it was around 28 when I connected with a couple other Guatemalan adoptees when I was living in St. Louis, in Missouri. And for me, it was just a hugely wide, eye-opening experience, realizing that, the experience I have in life, uh, there's many others who share that same experience and desire to connect with the country. I had a very strong desire to connect with going back more often in my 20s, and it's kind of just increased as time has gone on. But yeah, it was that really just connecting with other Guatemalan adoptees and realizing that there's a need for like having an organization that really helps build a network, helps build a community for all these people who have a very tightly knit shared experience in life. Being adopted from
Mhm.
Guatemala, I mean, from any country is a very unique experience, but it definitely kind of connects us through a pretty strong bond. But yeah, we started the organization in part because, we saw a need. At this point, there's a lot of Facebook groups are kind of loosely associated organizations and setups for Guatemalan adoptees, but there was nothing really official. And starting an official organization was something that we thought would be very beneficial to the community. And
Yeah.
it's kind of just become a really big part of my life. And it went from I, had no connection with other Guatemalan adoptees to, this is something I probably think about every day.
Yeah. That's amazing. That's awesome. And it just shows the power of community and when we're intentional and purposeful with building communities. And yeah, it's why you built yours. It's why I'm building the Inclusion Initiative, because this has been really missing for adoptees really all over the world.
Mhm.
And, to your point, right? Adoption, especially when you're a transnational adoptee, intercountry adoptee, and you're also a transracial adoptee, those are even more unique layers to adoption. And it is a very specific experience. Now, our experiences are vastly different, but the through lines are really similar, right? We are taken out of our countries of origin, our cultures, taken out of communities where, we really reflect everyone around us and they reflect us, and put into these communities and homes, which, oftentimes are loving and supportive and great, but nobody looks like us.
Mhm.
And nobody understands, our heritage and our backgrounds. And, a lot of us are not taught, right, to appreciate and celebrate the cultures and communities and really like deep, deep histories of where we come from. And I think, that is now starting to shift a little bit for transracial and transnational adoptees because of like organizations like yours that are starting to come into the fold. So fantastic. I'm so grateful you're building this for Guatemalan adoptees and helping to like model, right, what this can look like for other communities of adoptees. Um, but yeah, like this through line of really not understanding where we come from, how to appreciate it, even like various holidays, right? Like I just celebrated Korean Chuseok and I had never celebrated that before. I'm in my late 30s, like come on. But right, it's from growing up in communities and being surrounded by communities that just didn't know about it. Many people don't know about what a Korean Thanksgiving is. And so, these are like missing pieces of our experience, of the conversations that are really important to like start building community around. So I'm really glad that you're doing that with your organization. And I would love to hear a little bit more um, from you about like your adoption experience. Like I know you mentioned, right, you were brought into Minneapolis area, Minneapolis, Minnesota. I lived there for 10 years. So hello, fellow Minnesotan. And, it's a great state. It's beautiful. Minneapolis is vibrant and hustle and bustle. And there is like diversity there, but there often is not a lot of representation, right? Of a lot of different minority groups, such as Guatemalans. I'm sure there's not like a huge population of Guatemalans, and especially not a huge population of Guatemalan adoptees. For me, when I was there, I was Korean, right? And I often felt like I was one of the few or only in the spaces that I was in. Um, and so would love to hear a little bit more about, your experience growing up in that area. And like, I guess how that really impacted your journey now to building adoptees with Guatemalan roots.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I did grow up in Minnesota, and yeah, I kind of share what you said. It's a great place to grow up. It's a very just beautiful place. The winters are very rough. That's the one thing I don't miss.
Mm-hmm.
It's fun now. I live in Texas. I can go back and visit once a time around Christmas and experience the snow for a week. Um, yeah, it was a great place to grow up. So yeah, I grew up in the suburbs of Minneapolis, St. Paul, and as a lot of adoptees, I was adopted into a white family. My parents didn't think they could have children, and then they did find out that they were able to. So I do have three younger siblings that are all their biological children. I'm the only one that's adopted. Um, and my experience with that is I had a wonderfully loving, supportive family. We're very close. They have always been supportive of kind of what we're doing with adoptees with Guatemalan roots, but even before that, when I went to try to go get my first Guatemalan passport when I was 18, my mom kind of came with me, and I mean she spoke some better Spanish than I did at the time, and kind of helped me kind of navigate that. But yeah, kind of just, and they also took me back to Guatemala as a teenager, and it really kind of just instilled that, this is where you're from, this is important, and I think they really did the best they could there. But yeah, that being said, like it is, you know, growing up in a space where you are the only one that's from Guatemala, that you're the only one that looks the way you do. I went to a private school in the Minneapolis Twin Cities area. It was on the smaller side, but again, there's very few Latino or Hispanic students at the school. So I mean, I just grew up in a white world. That was kind of my whole growing up experience, and you definitely do realize that even though I was very welcomed, I really never, and I can't really say that I've experienced any issues of racism or discrimination. Within any of the spaces I've been in, both as a child and professionally and as an adult. But there is an internal realization that I am different than everyone I'm around, and I think it's kind of just little things. My parents are partly of well, they're all definitely European descent, but from Norway and Czech Republic and kind of areas. And just when they talk about some of those things, and I mean, of course, we should have pride where we're from, but it's just kind of little things like that are reminders. Well, I share in that, but not quite the same way that they do. So I mean, it's just kind of little things like that. I think throughout my life that really kind of have been noticeable for me. But when I did find other Guatemalans in the Twin Cities area, and there are some, but you're right, there's not many. For me, it was just really exciting to connect with people from Guatemala. I think when I first went there as a 17-year-old, that's kind of what just really made me fall in love with the country and the culture. Seeing the people, seeing the beautiful landscapes there, really kind of just lit my desire to connect with other Guatemalans. And I'm sure you've probably experienced this, but when connecting with other Guatemalans, it's always how do I explain this situation? How do I explain that I don't speak Spanish. I mean, I speak
Yeah.
Spanish better now, but
Yeah.
I still have an American accent, or I don't know all the words.
Yeah.
But yeah, just explaining it. Hey, I'm learning Spanish as an adult. I don't know, a lot of the customs and cultures. So, and, just being able to ask questions. But I mean, I've experienced, why don't you know Spanish? But for the most part, I would say the Guatemalans I've encountered are very, open and welcoming. A good chunk of them have heard about adoption from Guatemala. I mean, it was so prevalent
Yeah.
in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s that everyone at least is aware of it. So that's been great. Um, but then I think,
Yeah.
especially when I connected with other Guatemalan adoptees, that really just it was just kind of just like, wow, like all the stuff that I've kind of internalized and been thinking over the last, 25, I think at this point, like 26, 27 years, uh, you know, there are other people out there who have the exact same questions, the exact same lived experiences. And just to be able to connect and talk about that was just hugely eye opening, but also just um, kind of just like a connection to my culture and community in just like a profoundly different way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have a comment from somebody that says, and they teach Spanish from Spain in schools here in the US, which doesn't help, right? It's different in Guatemala, is it not?
Yeah. I mean, every Latin American country has, their own kind of slang terms or kind of just way of speaking Spanish, or even kind of their own accents. I mean, much like we have here in the U.S., different regions have different, accents.
Yeah, yeah. I thought that was an interesting point there, because it just further highlights, right, how much of a foreigner you are in your own country
Yeah.
when you're learning the language even in a different way. Um, so I want to back up a little bit to some of the things that you were sharing, because I think it would be really interesting to hear from your perspective. Two things. The first is, when your parents, which I'm really happy to hear that they were very intentional, wanted you to know about your country of origin, wanted you to experience that, wanted you to embrace that, um, just wanted you to be like, connected to your culture, which is fantastic. There's a lot of transracial adoptees, myself included, that never got those kinds of experiences or that encouragement. We were really conditioned and encouraged to assimilate
Mhm.
as much as possible to the white culture that was all around us. And for many of us, it was like how we were. I mean, it was a survival tactic. You really had to assimilate to survive, to somewhat fit in, to make friends, etc., etc. So I would love to hear a little bit about what that was like for you to go to Guatemala with your parents, how they broached those conversations with you. That would be really interesting to hear. And then also, like, when you started meeting Guatemalans in Minnesota, like your really first interaction with a Guatemalan adoptee, and I guess if there were like a lot of commonalities that you felt, or if you felt like you were strangers, those two experiences would be really interesting to learn more about.
Yeah. Yeah. So I can't remember exactly how old I was when I first started connecting with other Guatemalans in Minnesota. But there is one Guatemalan family in particular that really kind of just welcomed me in. There's a small Guatemalan community in the Twin Cities, and they have like an annual picnic, and they have a couple events throughout the year. But there's a woman, and she has some family in Minnesota as well, that kind of just welcomed me in, and she kind of says she adopted me into the Guatemalan community there. But for me, that was I don't want to say life changing, but it was kind of like it was a very it felt really special, I guess, in a way to be kind of welcomed that way. I've gotten to know her family in Guatemala. She's really kind of just opened up her home and community to me, and I think as somebody who didn't know Spanish, just them being comfortable with me speaking English or trying Spanish when I can, but also just like teaching me about the culture and really was helpful. I think it made me feel a part of a community that I was a stranger to. Not knowing the holidays, not knowing how even like the Guatemalan slang words. Like yes, I did learn some Spanish in high school, but it's not the same. Knowing all the different kind of nuances with how Guatemalans do things, or even knowing the food. So that was really helpful. And I'm good friends with this woman and her family to this day. But even through that, she kind of connected me with a lot of other Guatemalans in Minnesota that I'm still quite close with. And then connecting with other Guatemalan adoptees. So the first time I met somebody, I think I met maybe one or two when I was a teenager, but it was always just kind of in passing. At that point, I was not really interested in really kind of meeting other people adopted from Guatemala.
Yeah.
I had a kind of a basic curiosity, but I wasn't really that interested. It wasn't until after I went to Guatemala and really started wanting to learn and know more. But yeah, I think I was 25 or maybe 26. I met somebody adopted from Guatemala in St. Louis. I was living in Missouri at the time, and we just met up. He's actually one of the co-founders of Adoptees with Guatemalan Roots. But we met up. We kind of just thought it was going to be a quick. He mentioned that he was living in Texas, but he had come home for Thanksgiving, and we met up for dinner. And we ended up talking for probably 3.5 hours.
Wow.
He's become a very good friend, and we ended up starting Adoptees with Guatemalan Roots together, along with there was 5 of us in total who started it. But yeah, it was just kind of just like he would say something. It's like, oh my gosh, that just resonates with me so much. And kind of vice versa, I would say something, and yeah, it was a very eye-opening experience.
Yeah, looking back, do you wish you would have started like that process of your journey sooner?
That's a good question. I think it kind of happened at the right time. I don't know if I would have been that interested as a teenager to really have some of these conversations. Yeah, I think I would say it happened at the right time. I think I was kind of mature enough. I had kind of worked through some of these things. I was ready to actually talk about, some of these experiences, or I was actually able to kind of verbalize them. I think when I was a teenager, these were things I thought about and feelings that I had, but it was definitely difficult to put it into words. And I think, when I was around, the mid to late 20s, it was kind of the perfect time where I had enough time to work through it and be able to actually talk about it. I don't know how that would have gone had it happened earlier.
Yeah. I know it's in retrospect, it's hard to know, but I'm like, I don't know. I think at any point when we have like those opportunities, like yes, we might have reacted to them differently, but it's just, for me, it's never too early, right? It's never too early to have those kind of opportunities. So, I'm give a lot of kudos to your parents for being intentional and really trying to help you just appreciate and just know your where you come from and your culture and your heritage, and celebrate that with you. So I would love to hear a little bit about how they approached those conversations with you, especially like when you were planning your first trip there. Were you excited? Were you hesitant? Did they tell you why you were all going? Was it just a family vacation, or was it an intentional trip for you to go see where you were born?
Yeah. Yeah. So I think they were always quite intentional. From the as early as I can remember, I knew I was adopted. I knew I was from Guatemala. Like I always had, at the very least, some things from Guatemala. They showed me my adoption paperwork. Almost as soon as I could read. So I mean, these were all things that I think they did well. That was intentional, but it was always kind of just like, you know, take it as you want. I had some letters that my birth mother had written to me so that I could read when I was older. And I think the first time I read it, well, I think they had to translate it for me. I was probably 10, and as a 10-year-old, I don't think I really comprehended what she said, and
Mhm.
I don't know if I really cared that much at that time. Um, but I think as I got older in my later teen years, they brought it out again and uh, talked about kind of the significance behind that. And then, yeah, as far as the trip to our first trip to Guatemala, yeah, it was a very intentional, like, let's take a tour of the country. But we also did kind of connect back with the adoption agency, and we, got to spend some time with them while we were there. But yeah, so it was a very intentional, like, this is where we're going, this, and, my whole family, so my younger siblings came as well. And it was also just an opportunity for them to get to see the country and kind of just see where I'm from as well.
Yeah. And did you find that after that trip, like, did your family kind of adopt some of the traditions and, cultural, like celebrations and practices of Guatemala?
Um, yeah, I don't know if I would say that. It was, I mean, in some ways, yeah. I mean, my parents still have Guatemalan art in their home. I mean, I think kind of just throughout my life, like, it has been, part of, kind of woven in. But yeah, I mean, they have, yeah, Guatemalan fabrics in their house, and yeah, I think I would say that, yes.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. They wanted to integrate you into like their family story, which is awesome. Well, thank you for sharing all of that. And I just, again, I love your experience, and yeah, I really appreciate just your family's inclusion of your Guatemalan heritage. And so I would like to pivot a little bit and now talk about your perspective as a transracial adoptee, and of course, your general personal perspective of what you appreciate the most about Latinx and Hispanic culture as we're celebrating Hispanic History Month, and so, or Heritage Month. And so, yeah, would just love to hear a little bit more about that from your perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's a lot that could be said to a question like that.
Yeah.
Uh, but yeah, I think some of the things that I appreciate, and it's definitely changed over the years. Uh, and yeah, what do I? Well, yeah, I guess I'll just kind of talk about some experiences I've had over the years. But I guess some of the things I really appreciate are Guatemalan food. I think food is a really big way that we can connect, and we see it within our community. People love Guatemalan food. I think it's an easy way that everyone can connect, even if there's that language barrier. I've learned how to cook some Guatemalan food. There's a couple dishes that I really love. A couple of them are Guatemalan ceviche, as well as Guatemalan like street hot dogs. They're called chucos. They're some of my favorites. And then, I mean, I love the music from Latin America, from Guatemala. I think those are some ways that I really kind of appreciate our heritage. And then, just the beauty of the country. I mean, Guatemala has just such a rich history. Some of the Maya traditions. I've been learning more about that. I've had a chance to see some of the ruins there. It's not something I had learned about as much growing up, but kind of in the last couple of years, it's something that I've learned a lot more about, and it's just really cool to understand that and kind of just see like kind of the long tradition that Guatemala is a part of. So I think those are the things that I would kind of highlight. But then also, the kind of the sense of community and family that I see in Latin America and especially Guatemala, and that's become more and more real for me. I've connected with my birth family 8 years ago. We're very close. I mean, I see them many times a year, but I also have family from Guatemala that lives here in Houston. So kind of just
Wow. I
being able
didn't
to,
know that. That's
yeah,
amazing.
yeah, I have a couple cousins here. So to be able to kind of have that, that family connection and kind of get to see some of those, kind of those experiences that I did miss out on. I think it was last year, I was able to go to my niece's birthday here in Houston, and kind of just to see how they celebrate and the different kind of Guatemalan traditions they do at birthdays was really cool to see. I mean, obviously that's not something I experienced I think she was turning 4. So that was really cool to be a part of, and have family that has kind of welcomed me in, to be able to experience some of those things.
Wow, that's incredible. So you reunited with your birth family 8 years ago. That must have been like a very obviously exciting experience, but also I'm sure it produced a lot of anxiety, especially when you were first going to meet them. How did that happen? Did you learn about them through your adoption papers and through your visit with the adoption agency?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it was definitely a pretty big like experience in life, and yeah. So my adoption was was an open adoption, and I came to find this out later that this is pretty uncommon for Guatemala. So I had a picture of my birth mother growing up. Like I always knew what she looked like, and my parents actually had an opportunity to meet with her when I was adopted. So I always knew her name. I had the opportunity, like I had her information. I could have looked her up. I interned in Guatemala when I was 20, and I thought about doing it then. I was there for about 4 months doing an internship, but for whatever reason, I was at peace kind of with just where I was at. I decided to never pursue that more, even though I had a couple of really good opportunities where I could have done that. But yeah, it actually was through the family that did the adoption. They gotten back in contact with her through kind of just like a chance encounter, and they reached out to me and just said, "Hey, we found her. Would you like to connect?" And I was quite shocked, but of course, I was very excited to connect with them. But in the meantime, she had told. I mean, my birth mother had not told anyone about me, but she had told her kids. So I have 5 younger siblings there, and they were able to find me. I mean, they had my name from their side of the adoption
Wow.
paperwork, and they were able to find me through social media quite quickly. Actually, before I was actually able to connect back through the adoption agency. So yeah, it was a bit shocking. I got a message. I think it was like 10 p.m. on a Thursday night. I was by myself, and just saying like, "Hey, I think I'm your brother," and I was I mean, I was just shocked. I never
Mm-hmm.
considered that I might have siblings. So, we quickly, talked. I did find out. I mean, we were able to verify, yes, I'm the person you're looking for. This is my family. So we talked for about 4, I think it was about 3.5 months over WhatsApp. And then I actually went down and stayed at their house, met them at the airport in Guatemala, and lived at their house for about a month. I was able to work from their house. And kind of looking back, it was a bit crazy. As I met, I mean, for all intents and purposes, they were strangers. I didn't know anything about them. We did have that 3.5 months to talk and really, I mean, get to know someone as well as you can over WhatsApp, chat and calls. Um, but in a way, I'm glad I did it. I think it was, it was a bit risky, I guess, just meeting at the airport and then just going and staying at their house. I had no idea what I was going to expect. My Spanish was not great at this time, so there was definitely issues communicating. Thankfully, one of my sisters spoke fluent English, so I was able
Wow.
to at least communicate through her if I couldn't communicate something in Spanish. Um, but yeah, I stayed with them for a month, and it was a wonderful experience. I'm really glad I did that and kind of took that risk of jumping in head first. I don't know if I'd recommend that for every transracial adoptee going back. It might be too much. Definitely take it at your own pace. Know
Yeah.
yourself. Know if that's the right thing for you. But for me, I'm really
Yeah.
glad I did that. I think it kind of built trust, and it kind of laid the foundation for the past. I think it's going on 9 years now that we've known each other, and I've kind of seen that experience of every time I would go back when I first met them, they would all show up as a whole family at the airport, pick me up to,
Oh.
and they treated me like a guest. I wouldn't, they wouldn't let me do anything like help out with anything around the house. Uh, but now it's kind of just gone to like I show up in Guatemala, and I was there 2 weeks ago. Like they don't meet me at the airport anymore. So now I just show up at their door. I think even recently I was at their house, and nobody was there, so I had to wait outside 20 minutes till someone showed up. So, but I really appreciate that. I've gone from being this guest to
Your
he's our brother.
family.
Yeah, he's
Yeah,
our
your
brother that lives in
family.
Houston, and yeah, I think there's something to be said for that, to be able to experience that. And, it's something I think that can only happen over, a period of time, being able to have those, you know, in-person interactions.
Yeah, that's really, really special. Yeah, your experience is definitely not super typical. And that's really special that you have, the connection with your family like that you're able to build such like a wonderful, deep family connection where you're just really comfortable with each other and just able to build like those relationships, those authentic relationships together. I love that. Yes, I agree. Staying with your birth family who you've never met for a month is probably not for everybody. But what an awesome way to really just get to learn your family better and just be a part of their lives in that way. That's really, really, really special. And I don't know, did I miss this? Was this with both of your parents or one side of your parents?
So this was with my birth mother, like to her side of the family. I
Your
have
side?
connected with my birth father, and that is a story in itself. We actually connected through 23andMe. I didn't really have much interest in doing 23andMe. Like I had been able, I there's many people within our organization who have used it as a way to find out, here's, basically what my genetic makeup is, trying to
Yeah.
find some of those medical records. I mean, that's kind of a common thread is, I don't know my medical history. And I know for many, the 23andMe, being able to use that has been really helpful. But I was able to kind of ask all those questions, get an idea of, where they came from in Guatemala. So I didn't really have any interest to do it, but so many people within our community had been doing it. So I was like, you know what, I'll just take it.
Mhm.
I'm slightly curious to see, but I actually was able to connect with my birth father through 23andMe. I mean, that's kind of a long story, but
Yeah.
we've
Look,
been able to connect, and he lives in a more rural part of Guatemala. So I have gone to visit him, and we talk as well. But that is a bit more recent. That happened about 3.5 years ago.
wow. I'm really happy for you. I'm happy that you got to connect with both your birth parents and like nothing is simple, right? These are like
Yeah.
really complicated, complex experiences that can be many, many things all at the same time, like wonderful, hard, challenging, just all of these things wrapped up into these experiences. So yeah, I totally understand when you say. That's just a whole nother story for a whole nother time. And I hope we get to hear that sometime. But I'd love to jump in and talk a little bit about adoptees with Guatemalan roots. Now that we have a really rich and deep understanding of just kind of your journey and like how this has obviously led you to build this organization and how the certain things that you focus on within your organization is really interesting because it's so adoptee centered, right? We see a lot of adoption organizations or organizations that support adoptive families and a lot of resources, right, for adopters and families and maybe agencies and things like that. But there aren't as many organizations that specifically provide targeted resources to adoptees, which is so needed and critical. Yeah, families, obviously, we want them to have support as they're adopting youth from around the country or from around the world, because they do need to be able to have what they need to have like successful, set up their families for success. But for adoptees, like this impacts us completely, our entire lives. These are our identities. All of our life experience is shaped, right, around our adoption story or our foster care story. And so you have built this organization with your co-founders and have provided some very specific resources that would be really interesting to hear about because of how you center their experiences and like because of what you've experienced being an adoptee from Guatemala. These are obviously things that you needed and we're looking for as well. So I'd love to hear a little bit about your work within these resources.
Yeah, and I definitely second kind of what you said about needing adoptee organizations that are really centered around adoptees, and I think adoptee run is the best way to do that. But yeah, so we talked about it a little bit before, there's an estimated 50,000 children adopted from Guatemala. There's better numbers for the U.S. There's 30,000 that were adopted to the U.S., and then the other 20,000 are throughout Canada, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and then Israel. And yeah, I mean, for a country the size of Guatemala, I think the population is about 18 million now. But 50,000 kids is a lot. I mean, that's quite a few people. But back when adoption was happening, I can't remember the exact numbers, but the population was anywhere from like 11 to 14 million. But at the height of adoption, 1 out of every 100 children born in the country was being adopted out. So adoption touches everybody in the country. I think it's very common to talk to people in Guatemala, and it's like, oh, my aunt, had a child that was adopted out, or my cousin. So everybody is connected to it some way or another, or at least has heard about it. So yeah, it's definitely a part of the country's history. But I think one thing that's unique about Guatemala, and I know some other countries do this, I think there's a couple other countries in Latin America that do. I think Colombia does, where they allow adoptees to have citizenship. But Guatemala is kind of the easiest, and I think it's a bit unique where we are Guatemalan citizens by birth. I have a Guatemalan passport and ID card, everything, and there's nothing I need to do to go and reclaim that citizenship. It's just something that we have. So that is definitely one unique thing about Guatemala. But I'll kind of talk about that a bit more, like when I talk about what we do. But kind of what we primarily focus on in adoptees with Guatemalan roots is, helping Guatemalan adoptees find their identity and build community, as well as kind of just educate the public on, this is something that happened, is a phenomena that happened for the, 30 years within Guatemalan history. There are a lot of children that were adopted from Guatemala, and what does that mean? What are their lived experiences? What did they need to really find their identities and to thrive in the world? And we like to focus on identity for particular reason, because like we think that's really key for uh, just being able to be at peace and understanding, you know, what went on through your adoption. I mean, there's just so many different questions and topics that can be talked about. But I think when people are able to be comfortable with who they are, be comfortable with their adoption, connect back to their roots, I think there's just a natural desire to want to know where you're from and to connect back to things in Guatemala. So that's what we really focus on. But there's just a lot of ways that could happen. So a couple like the programs that we do, we have a conference that we do every year. This 2024 is our 5th year doing it, but we also have, and that'll be in Chicago in May 2024. But we also have events throughout the year. We've held events at Guatemalan soccer games when they play here in the U.S. We also just have had events for Guatemalan Independence Day. We did one recently. I think that was in New Jersey. But we also just have kind of larger meetups, and it's more just people getting together for a weekend or a day to just kind of connect and get to know each other throughout the year. And that's been really just beneficial. We just see the connections that are made, the stories that are shared, and people just it really, they kind of feel a connection in just a whole new way by being able to share their experiences and having people understand what they're saying. So that's a huge part of what we do. And then we also kind of, when it comes to identity, is we want to allow people to be able to connect back to Guatemala. And we do that through a variety of ways, whether it's supporting people in wanting to connect, go back to the country for the first time, just educating them on here are places to visit, here's what the culture is like, here's what to expect. Yeah. But I think it also comes in other cases. For me, my first connection to Guatemala was through soccer. I played soccer growing up. I'm a huge fan of the Guatemalan national team, and I would watch the matches when I was a teenager, and it's just something that I loved. But we're hoping that if every Guatemalan adoptee can, connect to the country through something that they love, whether it's food or music or art, or, going back there to volunteer. I think that kind of really builds a connection that's meaningful more than, I have I can hang some Guatemalan fabric on my wall. And, that's important to have those symbols, but having that meaningful connection means a lot. So I'll kind of highlight a couple of the programs. So we've connected with the Guatemalan Soccer Federation, and there are actually a couple of Guatemalan adoptees that play on the Guatemalan national team.
Oh, cool.
Right, so that's been hugely successful. Not only does it, has it really been great for our organization to see, to get into the media and, have them share their stories, but it was really just wonderful to see how welcoming Guatemala has been for these athletes, and for them to kind of just raise awareness about adoption. So that's one program that's been really successful. And then we've also done kind of lobbying work with the Guatemalan government. About 2 years ago, myself and one of our board members had the opportunity to meet with the current president of Guatemala, President Giamattei, to make a formal request that we have digital access to our birth certificates and our records. And then we also asked to strengthen, there's a free birth family search that's provided by the Guatemalan government, but to really make it more accessible. And kind of the way that we've always gone about when it comes to making a request to the Guatemalan government and lobbying and working with them is that we believe it's in the country of Guatemala's best interest to help us provide access. I mean, of course, it's the right thing to do. We're Guatemalan citizens. We have a right to all these things. Mm-hmm. But sometimes, governments don't always do things for the right reason. We have to kind of provide the incentives. So that's something we've really focused on. Like I mentioned earlier, we're Guatemalan citizens by birth. We have all the rights as Guatemalan citizens. We can go and obtain a passport by just going to the consulate and embassies around the world and, applying for one like normal other Guatemalans do. But Guatemalan adoptees are, for the most part, are very well educated. with the high cost of adoption from Guatemala, the families that were able to afford to adopt are usually, upper middle class and wealthier Americans and Europeans. So there's just a lot of, well-educated people within our community, but also that have access to opportunities and different things that a lot of Guatemalans do not, whether they're Guatemalan migrants living in the US or Guatemalans in the country. So we really kind of just made a point to make sure that the government knows that this is a group of Guatemalan citizens that are abroad that you don't know anything about, that really have a lot of opportunity to give back to the country and really improve the country. And that has really helped with our conversations with them. And they approved that request. The president approved the request, and they actually rolled out the services. I'm still a bit shocked at how quickly they did it. I think we met with them in January, and they approved it the next month, and then the system was live and ready to go in May of 2021. Wow. But yeah, that's has constantly been our thesis, that it's in the best interest of the Guatemalan government and as a country to welcome us back, make it as easy as possible for us to connect back, and we can give back to the country. And I think athletes on the national team is a really concrete, visible way to show they're making the teams better. But also through foreign investments, we have adoptees who have started companies in Guatemala, who I myself have invested in a Guatemalan company called Mil Alas, we're a cacao liqueur company. But to see more and more of that, I think as more and more adoptees connect back, they get their passports, they get their ID cards, it just opens the gates for this kind of thing to happen. It could just be as simple as visiting the country a couple times a year, so through tourism. We're also seeing adoptees who are buying houses, buying properties there. So in the long term, I think as more and more of these adoptees become adults, become professionals, and for the most part, everyone does have that desire to connect to the country and to give back and help, if possible, through with the skills and talents that they have. So that's something I'm really excited to see, kind of where that goes in the future. But yeah, those are kind of some of the things that we do.
Yeah, that's really, really exciting. It's really powerful. It's so critical and necessary. These resources, these connections that you're creating for Guatemalan adoptees to be able to actually find just find their connection again, reclaiming their homes, right? Reclaiming their citizenship, all of these things of their country of origin. It's so amazing. I think Guatemala might be one of the few countries that are doing that. Like South Korea, where I was born, these kinds of resources and just avenues of reclaiming our citizenship and our homes and all this kind of stuff is not available to us. It takes a lot of legwork. It takes a lot of effort to even know how to even begin to do these kinds of things. And I'm not a citizen of South Korea. I lost that because I'm adopted here in the US. So yeah, that's really interesting. And I really commend you and your team and your co-founders for this awesome work you're doing for the community. And so just knowing all of these things that you're doing with your conference coming up, that's really cool. That's in Chicago this year, right?
Yeah, we're doing it in Chicago.
Yeah, that's awesome. So why don't you share with our audience, and I have your website pulled up here on the screen, but why don't you share with the audience maybe a couple ways they can support you and support Guatemalan adoptees through your efforts?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, thanks for putting our website up. You can also find us on social media with Guate Roots. Different ways that you can support us all. I mean, if you're inclined to donate, we are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. So anyone can make tax-deductible donations to us. That's always greatly appreciated. But I think just kind of ways that you can support us is, follow us on social media. That's hugely helpful. But also just, I think one thing that I think we could help with it, or that we could use help with is, or just kind of within your daily life is including Guatemalan adoptees or just Latin American adoptees with their country of origin. I think that's one thing that a lot of Guatemalan adoptees struggle with is, sometimes they may have a bad experience. They get made fun of for not speaking Spanish, or, hey, why don't you know this holiday, or why don't you know this tradition, or, kind of whatever it is. And that can be really hard to want to come back and, try to go to a Guatemalan restaurant again, or to make that connection when they felt rejected by, their country of birth and their community. So I think, we've tried to make a big effort to, to say, hey, we are part of the Guatemalan community, and we have, we're a part of it as much as everyone else. We just have some different circumstances that kind of got us to where we are. And I think, I'm sure that you all have the similar experiences in the Korean adoptee community, but I know many Latin American adoptees feel that way too. They really do want to.
Yeah, we straddle two worlds, right? Mm-hmm. And we don't really fit in either. Yeah, that is definitely a shared experience across all transracial adoptees, I would say. Well, that's great. Thank you for sharing ways that folks can support Guatemalan adoptees with Guatemalan roots and your community. And, the last question I want to ask you, just going back to the fact that we are celebrating Hispanic Heritage Month. What is one takeaway or one aspect of your culture and your community that you really want to highlight for our audience? I would love to hear that from
you. That's a good question.
And either from the general perspective or from being an adoptee perspective.
Yeah. I guess I'll do one from both. So I think something to highlight from the Guatemalan community is, Guatemala just has a beautiful, rich tradition, especially in the Maya tradition. I mean, it's a civilization that's, thousands of years old, but, the Maya people are still here today. And just some of the beautiful fabrics and culture that they've created, I think is just incredible. It's something that, I'm, have some Maya connection, part Maya. I'll probably never find out what community within Guatemala I connect to. But yeah, it's just a beautiful community and culture. And yeah, I think it's something that Guatemalans are very proud of. The Maya understanding of math and science is just a very beautiful history. And then for Guatemalan adoptees, I'm just really excited to see all the Guatemalan adoptees that are growing up today who have opportunities to connect to the country. I think through social media, and it's much easier to find resources. So I'm just proud of the community, and especially just the way that so many younger adoptees who are in their teens and early 20s are sharing about their experiences, whether it's through writing, through art, through social media. And just there's so many different voices out there. And some have just really amazing, powerful stories. And, that's part of the Guatemalan community, just as much as any of these other things are.
Yeah, I love that. It's right. We are just as much a part of our countries of origin as anyone else. And I think that's really important to hit home, especially for transracial adoptees in your community, because we often feel like we're not. So thank you so much, Ben, for all your incredible work through Adoptees with Guatemalan Roots. Thank you for sharing your story here. Thanks for being in community with me and being a part of the Inclusion Initiative. I really appreciate you. And again, check out the Adoptees with Guatemalan Roots website posted here. And we can just share ways. If you want to get in touch with either of us, our LinkedIn handles, or I'm sorry, our Instagram handles are there. Our websites are there. Again, I'm Grace Young Foster, founder and CEO of the Inclusion Initiative. And yes, happy Hispanic Heritage Month, everybody. And we will see you next time. All right. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.